the very technical topic. But since you're already here, if you'd like to, you can have a seat or stand up. Up to you. And that's perfect. So since you asked the question about Pave Spike, and our speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Greg Davis, is actually here, thought it might be best to just address it now, since the question had already been asked earlier this morning, and so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Short introduction, I'm Greg Davis. I've had a long career in intelligence. I started off as a draftee in 1968 and made my way through the ranks.
All right, yeah.
Okay. At any rate, I ended up at DIA, an organization who I opposed for many years, but I ended up creating an organization which devolved into the Defense Clandestine Service. At any rate, in the process, in learning more and more about intelligence throughout my career, one of my assignments was in Laos as part of the exploitation team, which was there. As part of that, we interrogated or debriefed prisoners of war who had gone back for many years and were still in prison camps. And so we would pick and choose who we would interrogate, and we had technical resources available to jog their memories, i.e. satellite imagery, which back then was classified that even existed. At any rate, the interrogations included, always started out with, do you have any information at all on American prisoners of war or their bodies? Do you know where the bodies are buried? Or do you know where the prisoners are being held? Or have you ever seen an American prisoner? Now, all that is background for the issue of Pave Spike, because Pave Spike was one of those technical resources that we had in addition to satellite imagery. So when I would do the interrogations or debriefs, and they were never hostile, you always get much better information if you have a non-hostile interrogation. But we created any number of reports that went back to the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, which at that time was strictly an analytical organization. And they had an office that managed POW, MIA information. And one of the people in my office was Wake Turrison, who eventually became the head of that office. But the basis of the interrogations was to create a database. We had the database, we had as many names of U.S. prisoners that we knew existed, and then we had photos and so on. We would interrogate prisoners to find out what they knew and the locations of any evidence of the existence of American POWs or their remains if they were killed. And that went on for quite some time. This was supplemented by information that was provided by the prisoners themselves. The program was called Operation Pave Spike. It was delivered by the United States Air Force. Pave Spike consisted of literally spikes, which were dropped as if they were bombs from F-4s. The F-4s departed from Ubon Ratchathani Air Force Base in northeast Thailand, down near the border of Laos and Cambodia. It's now a commercial airport, but at that time it was a headquarters for Air Force F-4s and AC-130s, which nobody really had heard of at that point. But these paved spikes, these electronic spikes, were designed to look like trees or bushes or any form of local vegetation. You had research and development centers creating these things, and they're highly sophisticated. Air Force pilots, jet fighter pilots or bombers, were instructed on the use of these, saying, if you get shot down, if you are captured, look for such and such a design of these spikes. You know what to look for. And if you see one along the trail when you're being dragged up to Hanoi, if you stop to rest and ask your captors if they'll let you sit down next to a tree for a few minutes, you can open up the spike with a secret door underneath the leaf or underneath the bark, and you can key in just a few digits when you were there and your identity code, which could be a 4-digit code. This was all there. You could do all this in a matter of seconds if you needed to. You know, you could say, hey, I gotta stop and take a whiz. And you could do it while you're standing next to one of these spikes. That was a recording. And they were all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and all along the areas where we knew that prisoners would be paraded until they got up to Hanoi. Now I know this as far as being paraded because I was briefly a POW, but I declined the invitation by my captors to remain with them. So I left them behind and continued on with my career. Nonetheless, Pave Spike was a highly sophisticated technological 21st century operation which at the end of the war was destroyed. Now, who destroyed it? A guy named John McCain. John McCain destroyed Pave Spike. And he was universally hated by lots and lots of folks who knew this. At any rate, that's the end story on Pave Spike. I wish I had a picture of one, but basically it just looks like a tree or a small bush or whatever. One of the most sophisticated technological devices that we ever used, and it became part of what we call the UGS program, the Unattended Ground Sensors, which had thermal, acoustic, and one other. At any rate, they could track anybody as long as they passed it. And we used that for the counterinsurgency program, which I later ran in northeast Thailand. And that was very effective for monitoring the movements of insurgents. But that, in short, is the Pave Spike program. There were other similar programs, but I won't go into those now. So, at any rate, if you got a question, I'll take your question.
Two questions. What were those strikes ever used? Did you get data back from them? And why did McCain kill them?
The questions were the spikes used and why did McCain kill them? The spikes were used on a number of occasions. Not all pilots who were down and were captured were ever able to use them because they had quite a range of paths that they took to get up to North Vietnam. And a lot of the prisoners really did never make it to North Vietnam. They would end up in prison camps in Laos, which were not on the regular paths. But a lot of data was collected from prisoners who actually used these spikes. It was a very, very big program. I mean, there were thousands of these things dropped, and they all had markers so that a pilot could recognize them. And if you run into any of the pilots from that era, chances are they can tell you precisely what those markers were. Now, why did McCain block them? McCain had absolutely no interest in having any U.S. prisoners come back and talk about his treason. Standard information within a lot of these prison camps was, the captors Pathet Lao or the North Vietnamese and say, why do you think this guy is a hero? He spilled his guts. He doesn't want you. When he came back, he did everything in his power to destroy any information on U.S. POWs, and the threat there was, if you say anything as a POW, as a former POW, we'll prosecute you. We will destroy you, we'll destroy your families. So, needless to say, John McCain is not my favorite guy. But, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, what year was Pave Spike initiated?
I can't tell you when it was initiated. I used it, I was there from 70 to 74. But it was in effect prior to that. I'd say it was probably initiated in the late 60s.
Yeah, because they would have dropped these sensors on the Ho Chi Minh Trail to track the enemy coming in.
Right.
So I guess it could have a different purpose to help to get the information on POWs going out. But also Baron 52, one which Matajoff and Cressman were on, was shot down in 73. Did crew members have access to these sensors if they came by them to put the information in?
Everybody who was a crew member or pilot knew that these existed. They were all briefed on it.
So how could we find out if Cressman or Matajoff ever got information? That would be critical.
Those records should be available through the Air Force. That was an Air Force program, went on for years. We used the extension of that was the Unintended Ground Sensor Program. And those were fabulous. I could track the movements of any insurgents in southern Laos, northeast Thailand, or even Vietnam.
Right now, tomorrow, Lieutenant General McInerney, the U.S. Air Force, will be at Rolling Thunder speaking.
He'd be a good guy
Would he
to
have
ask.
access? He's about 82, but he might have access. He would have been a relatively young, maybe lieutenant colonel pilot
Right.
at the time. But
Absolutely.
this would be critical for him.
He
to
would more than
initiate
likely
something.
be able to know, give you information.
Okay.
I can understand why John McCain would kill the program, because he's made it his entire career to interfere with any information coming out of there about POW. Regarding the methodology that he would use to kill it, did he attach an amendment to an authorization bill to deny funding, or exactly how did he kill the program?
I can't address that because I wasn't on Capitol Hill. I was off doing other stuff. All I know was the feedback that I would get from Wake Turrison when I would go over to visit him in the bowels of the Pentagon. They had a crummy little office. And go over and say, how's it going? He says, I got all this information, but nobody's interested. He says, we can't move forward. And I said, well, all right, who's the problem? And he says, McCain. But I mean, we didn't go into great detail because it was, these were silent barriers. And if you messed with too many people on Capitol Hill, you disappeared, or your career was finished. Especially if you were in the military. I mean, he would deep 60 in a heartbeat.
Last question, do you recall any reporter that might have reported and got published that talked about McCain killing this
No idea.
program?
Back in those days, I had too many clearances to be able to talk to any reporter. To talk to a reporter back then was a problem if you had those clearances.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
One other question. McCain came back as a POW, and he was not promoted by the United States Navy for 18 months. So the Navy knew, I believe, that he was a collaborator. Air Force Colonel, who am I thinking of?
Ted Guy,
What?
Ted Guy.
Ted Guy, who passed. He wanted to prosecute McCain when they got to Clark Air Force Base. He was discouraged. Now, between 73 and 1980, when McCain got elected to Congress, what power and influence could he have had to kill this? I mean, did he have people, was his father still the chief admiral in the Pacific that he could squash any information on POWs?
Keep in mind that his father was a 4-star admiral, back when there weren't that many admirals.
And unfortunately, his father seemed to support him despite the interests of, I mean, guys that were getting killed even on the carry what, Enterprise? They were sitting. Forrestal.
Well, you had this very powerful 4-star general who was in charge of the Pacific Command. And so basically one of the problems was that you couldn't get a lot of reports through PACOM, through their intelligence office, to go back to the States. So we bypassed them as much as possible because we had a direct link into the Pentagon. But the problem was, once McCain's father retired, you think, okay, the guy's gone, he doesn't have any more influence. He had lots of influence because he had lots of colleagues we, graduated from the academy with, and they would protect him and they would protect his son, no matter what his son was doing.
It's like the mafia.
Right. And so it was, he didn't have to do it himself. He'd say, I want to make certain that my kid does well. And so you got this mafia of senior officers who were out to make certain that McCain was protected. And he also had lots of support in the Armed Services Committee. I mean, basically, what I'm doing is saying Congress has a tendency to be corrupt. And that doesn't come as anything new to anybody here. We've all seen as much corruption as we can fathom. But there are a lot of problems. So I'll save more remarks for this afternoon. Yes, ma'am.
Those devices, is it PAVESPIKE?
No, spike. Yes.
Spike.
Pave, as like paving the road,
And spike?
and spike. And the joke on it was, we're paving the road with spikes.
Were they capable of photographing
Um,
or just taking information someone actually put into it?
They did seismic as well as thermal and acoustic sounding, so they could collect that information. The panel on there was, they would take information that was keyed in. I don't believe that they had the photographic capability at that time. Our photography was great for satellites, but not so much at that level.
Now Roger may know this, but Frank Anton, who was a returned POW, when he was being debriefed, and they showed him pictures of himself, where did they get those photographs?
Those were taken by the Cubans. You know Cuba.
Yeah.
They were taken by Cuban reporters that was working the POW.
Okay, and then the Americans got the photographs from the Cubans?
They were usually published in the
Grandma.
Justice Grandma News.
Oh, okay.
Publication.
Okay, all right. And then also, with, I think it's called the McCain Act, can that be reversed since he's no longer living? I mean,
Any act could be revealed.
so they can, somebody could maybe initiate that?
Sure.
To where the men could get debriefings on themselves if they wanted?
Sure. Most of them had to sign non-disclosure agreements. If they didn't sign, then the threat was, if you don't sign this, we'll prosecute you for treason because we know that you gave information to the enemy. Now, I don't know a prisoner of war in the universe who has not spilled his guts at one point to his interrogators. And I proved during one class exercise at Fort Huachuca that I could turn anybody, any prisoner, even the most resistant, to spill his guts. And I did it with a full colonel in the infantry who volunteered to hold up against my questioning. And basically, it was all psychological. I pulled the information out of him without his knowledge.
Can you give us a sample of that?
Thank you.
Well, he can.
Basically, all psychological. You throw information at somebody and say, yeah, you don't really know anything. You know, this is the way it really is. And then the guy would come back and he'd say, no, 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 you're wrong. So I got order of battle on all of his units just by playing that game.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you don't mind, Larry Stark, our next speaker's here, and then you will have a lot of time for question and answers this afternoon during your
More than
session.
happy.
Is that fine?
Absolutely.
We appreciate it very much, and thank you for your coming in and answering the questions so far. Thank you.
My pleasure.